What's going on, guys? This is tower number 9, where I'm bringing you some footage of Double Red Sabine versus Double Red Sabine versus Red Leia. So this should be an interesting game. We'll have to see. We'll have to see where we go with it. Get a little risky here in resource there. See how this goes. So these are both very aggro decks, but my opponent has the powerful Leia ability. So my opponent leads off with the Spec Force Soldier, 1 cost 2/2. When played, a unit loses Sentinel for this phase. I'll play the Partisan Insurgent here. 2 cost 1/4. While you control another aggression unit, this unit gains raid 2, +2 power while attacking. My opponent may have another 1-drop here, it looks like, or some other card to pay for 1, maybe not. Could either play that or take initiative. Ends up being, ooh, Benthic 2 Tubes. Very strong on attack. Another friendly aggression unit gains raid 2 for this phase. It gets a +2/+0 while attacking. So this is actually a really good combo with my opponent's leader here, Leia Organa. Attack with a rebel unit, then you may attack with another rebel unit. That would allow 2 tubes to attack and then have this other unit attack immediately. So there's no chance for me to remove this unit before it makes its attack. I'll just take the initiative here, draw up. Resource here. So really I have 2 options. So one thing that I can do is I can kill 2 tubes before he attacks here by using open fire. This prevents actually 4 damage to my base this turn. And the problem is that it doesn't develop my board. I spend my whole turn spending 3 to counter a unit that costs 1. The other thing that I can do that I'm thinking about here is developing red 3. And then they're using the Partisan Insurgent to attack 2 tubes or to just attack the enemy base directly, at which point it can deal, I think, 5 damage. I think we're going to go with the more aggressive option here. I'm going to deploy red 3 and we'll see what my opponent does. So red 3, 3 cost 2/3 with raid 1. Each other friendly heroic unit gains raid 1. So this does not apply to the Partisan Insurgent. Does not apply to the Partisan Insurgent, but does apply to the. Oh, that's a surprise. My opponent goes for a trade. Okay. Or it's not quite a trade. So the Partisan Insurgent doesn't kill that guy. Um, I'm actually pretty happy with that outcome. I can Tarkin Town to clear that. This just isn't really something I'm so concerned with. Depending on the situation, I may Tarkin Town to clear that in order to get Sabine able to deploy safely. It looks like my opponent's playing a little more defensively there. So I'll just take the initiative here. I could have used Sabine's ability and probably should have actually. Ooh, Fighters for Freedom. That's a good one. Okay, well, I'll be able to clear that relatively easily. So on my turn, we're going to have 4 resources. So this is probably going to be an aggression turn. So I can potentially ready up a unit to get a second attack here, and then also kill one of his units. I think this is likely what we're going for this turn. I'll resource the basic X-Wing, which isn't very aggressive. So we'll lead off with the attack from red 3. So that's going to do 3 damage. And then Sabine can potentially do a bunch of damage herself, but my opponent's in a position to kill Sabine. So I'm trying to play this a little slow and get my opponent to remove to make some attacks, do some things that are going to make that threat no longer salient, and then Sabine can push damage to the base. What I would really like is if my opponent plays such that I will be able to use aggression to ready Sabine, but it seems comparatively unlikely. Oh, okay. So my opponent's kind of switched tactics here and going for more aggression rather than trying to play it safer. Okay, so I'm going to probably, let's see. So he's green red. So the risk of deploying Sabine right now is that my opponent could have a copy of Fleet Lieutenant to have the Fighters for Freedom defeat Sabine. I think I want to avoid that outcome more than I care about getting maximum value out of aggression. So we're going to play this safe. We'll open fire to kill the Fighters for Freedom. This will also prevent me from taking any damage from my opponent playing red units this turn. This will also allow me to play this Spec Force Soldier that I have in hand. And Then we can deploy Sabine and hopefully have Sabine attack and defeat or actually we'll probably deploy Sabine first so that the Spec Force soldier can counter a potential Sentinel. My opponent plays K2SO, strong unit there, um, but not one that's going to threaten Sabine's deployment. So now Sabine hits the field. And we're going to get rid of two tubes here, I think. One damage to the base and deploy the Spec Force soldier. Two tubes needs to go because that's just too much damage. And then on this next turn, I can potentially use aggression, clear K2, and continue. I am falling behind on damage to base, but I'm hopefully going to be in a better board state. Okay, my opponent goes for a medal ceremony. Bit of a low impact card to play here, quite frankly, because Sabine still kills two tubes. I think my opponent didn't realize that was going to be a kill. So then Sabine takes three, base takes one. Not sure what my opponent is doing there. So then we're going to, this guy is a 3/2, so he could just trade with Sabine. So we're going to just Tarkentown that guy off the board. That's the downside of having him fight the insurgent for my opponent. And then we are going to deploy the Spec Force soldier because that's just going to advance my board state by getting another unit on the field. And then we're going to pass, draw up, and get ready for the next turn. So a lot of smaller cards in hand here, not what I most want to see. We'll resource here. So this turn I'm probably going to try and do aggression plus the Spec Force soldier. We'll have to see exactly how it goes. My opponent should of course have K2 defeat Sabine. Um, Arguably it was a waste to use Tarkentown to clear that soldier because K2 can clear Sabine and remain alive, which would make him a better target for Tarkentown. But we'll see what my opponent does. I still have, I can kill K2 from full with aggression, but if my opponent plays that differently, I could potentially use aggression on Leia or something similar. I don't know what that was. Yeah, I think maybe my opponent only now realized this. Um, this one damage from Sabine. So K2 should just attack and defeat Sabine. That's a very straightforwardly good play for my opponent. Um, and you know, I'm a little curious why this isn't happening. Maybe my opponent's thinking over the options. I don't know what's in hand. Um, and I think I'm kind of in a mode where I'm just going to be, yeah. So K2 kills Sabine, so that's sort of the obvious thing to do there. I'm not sure if I should have saved the. I'm not sure if I should have saved Tarkentown for this, but I think it reduces overall damage, so it's good. What I'm going to try to do now is push a bunch of damage. So we'll do red 3 first because that is a more costly card to have removed. The Spec Force soldier is small. Arguably, I should swing with the Spec Force soldier first because my opponent plays Admiral Akbar. He can kill him. But there's a risk of like an open fire or similar killing red 3, which I consider to be more costly. Um, so then we're going to attack into the base here. What I'd really like is for my opponent to attack my Spec Force soldier with Leia and kill him. Because at that point I can do aggression and get Leia off the board while also readying something. Nope, the opponent's just going for the base, which is really not what I want to see here. More damage to base is going to be harder to deal with. So what we need to do, let's see. So I have the aggression play. So what we're going to do is kill a unit. Um, yeah, what we'll have to do is kill a unit. Probably going to have to be the fleet lieutenant here. Ready up one of my guys to swing into the base for 3, and then deploy another Spec Force soldier. And then I'll have 3, 6, 9. Yeah, that's still not lethal. I think I've lost this one, but we will. There is a chance. There is a chance. So we will keep at it. So we'll do aggression, kill this guy, and we will ready up red 3, I guess, 'cause it's harder to deal with. And then opponent has the initiative, might have another card. There's a card that does damage, I'm in big trouble. It's R2. That is actually, unfortunately, a problem with how desperate my board state is. Red 3 will hit the enemy base for 3, and then I will deploy another Spec Force soldier, but I think I've lost this one at this point. We'll have to see. None of that is a counter, so it looks like game over. My opponent has lethal, and I don't have any sort of damage enhancement that's going to allow me to take down R2D2. Um, so we will see. We will see how this goes. So Leia and K2 can swing in for 8, which would put me at 1 life, and then R2D2 can finish the job with the next action. I think I can do 11 damage, so I've missed lethal by 1, but it doesn't actually matter because I will be defeated long before I can actually do that. Additionally, my opponent could swing with Leia and K2 for the base, and then use Tarkin Town to kill his own K2, and K2's when defeated effect would then destroy the base. So I have sort of been stuck here. Yeah, and there is a chance my opponent will misplay it, but I think it's game over. Okay, so 4 to the base. And odd play there, a bit of a misplay. He kills a Spec Force soldier, and then oh no, actually it's fine. K2 just kills me with the when defeated damage. So actually, that's the better way to do it. Okay, so that was a tough one. I thought it was 2 damage when defeated, like the Raider and the uh, but even if that were the case, he could have just hit my base for 4 and then used the ability to defeat him. So actually, he had a better way to get K2 to deal 5 in 1 activation. Tough game for me. Wasn't really able to get my footing after my opponent had a substantially more aggressive start. Probably should have just gone for space from the get-go. Oh, this is funny. So my opponent had the 2 tubes plus Spec Force Soldier start. I could actually do the same thing. The problem is it's a lot worse for Leia than it is for Sabine. But I think we will. I think we will. Do I want to try it or do I want to go? I could do the much safer Sabine Explosives Artist start. Or the, yeah, so we're not going to do Partisan Insurgent, so we'll resource that. And then the question is, do I want to go for 2 tubes plus Spec Force Soldier, or do I want to go for Sabine? Let's try the 2 tubes plus Spec Force Soldier start. That worked well for my opponent last time. So I will lead off with the Spec Force Soldier. This guy is a 1-cost 2/2 with a relevant ability. My opponent has the Partisan Insurgent. I have 2 tubes. We will see how this goes, but it could be a very similar situation to last game, except this time we're mirrored. My opponent is the one with the Partisan Insurgent, and I am the one with 2 tubes and the Spec Force guy. Opponent takes the initiative. I'll use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base this time, and I will pass, draw 2. The problem is without Leia's ability, my 2 tubes is likely to be less relevant than my opponent's was last game. So on attack, another friendly aggression unit gains raid 2 for this phase. It gets +2/+0 while attacking. So if I do this, my Spec Force Soldier becomes a Strength 4 on offense, which is good. But the problem with it is that it doesn't give me an opportunity to, because I don't have Leia's ability to swing with both of them, my opponent will have an opportunity to interact with my Spec Force Soldier and potentially remove the advantage that I have here. So then the other question becomes, do I want to deploy Red 3 or do I want to deploy the Fleet Lieutenant? I think I'm going to deploy the Fleet Lieutenant because it's quicker, but we'll have to see what my opponent does. He does get to go first. Oh, we have an Admiral Akbar to kill 2 tubes. That's fine. That's a kind of slower play, not something that I'm incredibly fussed about. So under the circumstances, I am then going to go ahead and bring out Red 3. So raid 1 and each other friendly heroic unit gains raid 1. So my Spec Force Soldier now has raid 1. Partisan Insurgent hits my base for 1. I'm going to just target the enemy base here rather than engaging in low value attacks on units. I attack there. Opponent takes the initiative. Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base, and then pass. Draw 2. Okay, so we have an aggression here and a. So the question is, I think I resourced this Sabine. No, because that gives me a. So now I have a 5 resource play next turn. So we'll probably do aggression this turn. Admiral Akbar is an interesting choice for an aggro deck. I think he actually is correct to play here. Even though he's not an aggressive card, he helps in the aggro mirror, and he is one of the only removal cards that red-green has access to. Uh, Removal is generally more common in some of the other colors, but not really a feature here. He could double attack me to kill the Spec Force soldier, but either doesn't see it or doesn't want to, instead deploying the Fighters for Freedom. They're a pretty good card. I'll probably remove them with aggression this turn, but first we're going to go ahead and attack the enemy base for 3. I attack with the Spec Force Soldier first instead of Red 3 because my opponent has an opportunity to interact with Red 3. I think if I were this opponent, I would have used Leia's ability immediately to have Partisan Insurgent and Admiral Akbar attack and clear the Spec Force Soldier. One advantage to deploying the Fighters for Freedom is that it does mean that my opponent gets the bonus on the Partisan Insurgent, which is, well, you control another aggression unit, this unit gains Raid 2. However, I think it was not worth it because the one stat already there would have been sufficient to clear my unit. And my opponent is currently in the defensive, is currently on the defensive in an aggro matchup, which makes it better, I think, to hold off maybe. Leia's ability being used, 1 damage to my base from Akbar, and then he'll probably just take the kill with the Partisan Insurgent. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So then I'm going to, the good thing is my opponent is not entirely tapped out, but basically tapped out, which means I'm going to have the opportunity to use Sabine's ability, 1 damage to each base. My opponent does have a resource, which turns into a Spec Force Soldier. Hey, better than nothing. So 1 damage to my base from the Fighters for Freedom as well. That's convenient for my opponent. So I will then deploy Sabine. Opponent's just going to take the initiative here, or we could see a medal ceremony. It's actually a pass. Um, I don't understand a pass here. Well, that's okay. Maybe there could be a medal ceremony. They just wait to decide whether or not to use. So then we will have Sabine hit the enemy base for 4. Um, okay, red 3 will hit the enemy base for 3. Opponent now takes the initiative. Okay. Now we're going to do aggression. 4 damage there. Ready is Sabine, so ready a unit with 3 or less power. But yeah, I'm getting extra value because the raid and on attack, Sabine is 3 or less power, but she actually hits for 4. So then she gets to go in for another 4 damage, and then we're going to cap off the turn with Tarkin Town, kill the Partisan Insurgent. With another red unit on the board, that guy actually represents some damage, and I just want to clear things up as soon as possible, try to close the game this turn. So this time I'm feeling very ahead as we're going into these turns. Oh, and I draw the out of aspect surprise strike, which can win the game in 1 move. I guess we resource here. So this is a little trick that I have in this deck. I have 2 out of aspect surprise strikes. They do cost 4, but the way I see it, if a card costs 4 but wins the game immediately, I'm fine with having some copies of that. And you're often in that situation where you just need that extra bit of damage to close the game. That's kind of where I am now, actually. So if my opponent, for instance, right now my opponent's on 6 life, so I could use the Fleet Lieutenant instead, which would be better. But if my opponent heals with Akbar as the first action, maybe as the result of a double attack with Leia's ability, I will be able to surprise strike and inflict 7 damage with Sabine, assuming Sabine is not defeated. And that would be lethal even if my opponent heals 1. Also, if my opponent does not attack, if my opponent does not attack in a way that makes me need the surprise strike, I'll use the Fleet Lieutenant instead, so that my opponent doesn't have the surprise strike for a potential next round. That's kind of some thinking about, there's this element of strategic thinking, not just about the current game, but about future games in the same match. This is especially relevant with sideboarding. So my opponent deploys Leia, and so then we will Fleet Lieutenant Sabine into the base, and that's lethal. Okay, so then let's see if we do a game three. Yep, we're gonna go for game three. These now these Rebel aggro decks have been really popular recently because of some of the card reveals that we've been seeing, seeming especially suited towards this style of build. Ooh, this is a really interesting hand. So what this hand suggests to me is going heavily for space. We can do Alliance X-Wing plus Wing Leader. We have multiple copies of Aggression to push more damage and do removal later on. We can potentially get Sabine on the board. I think I probably want to resource one of these aggressions though, since it is actually a slower card as this deck goes. So yeah, we're gonna go for the space plan. So we'll resource like this, and hope my opponent doesn't lead off with a. Ooh, if my opponent leads off with an A-wing though, this is so bad. It's possible I should actually. It's possible I should actually mulligan. You know, I actually am. Yeah, so thinking about it more, I'm actually gonna mulligan this because if my opponent has an A-wing, it's a really bad start because the A-wing can just kill my X-wing. And then I guess I could have resourced the surprise strike and the fight. Yeah, so I could have resourced surprise strike and aggression. Then I would have had the fighters for freedom as an alternate play if my opponent counters my X-wing. Okay, so this hand is this hand's probably worse, but it's not unusable. We're gonna resource the metal ceremony and we'll resource so precision fire versus I think we'll do yeah, I think I resource the precision fire here. The problem is I have only a Spec Force soldier as my initial play. The upside is that I can buff him with a. Ooh, okay, so we're gonna see a funny situation here. My opponent leads with Sabine. I'm gonna play the Spec Force soldier. This is a really unfavorable start for me, but I will then Infiltrator skill my guy, so he's at least a 3/3. The problem is this is card disadvantage, so this is still a negative start for me. And I wish I had kept my initial hand and just resourced it differently. So we will see how this goes, but right now Sabine and the Spec Force Soldier could trade, which we might well see my opponent do. If my opponent doesn't take that trade, my Spec Force Soldier can attack and kill Sabine while remaining alive. This would, however, be a scenario where my opponent could have an easy Tarkin Town activation. So we'll see what the opponent. I do think that in retrospect, what I should have done is kept the initial hand, resourced aggression, and one of the surprise strikes, and then I have X-Wing to start, and then I can do either Wing Leader or I can do either Wing Leader or the Fighters for Freedom, depending on what happens on the next turn, with Wing Leader being preferential. But I was just very worried about I was just very worried about an A-Wing. Okay, so my opponent does take the trade. I consider that totally acceptable. I will, I now have the initiative by default. The question is, do I want to do Red 3 or Fighters for Freedom? Fighters for Freedom has more immediate value since Red 3 is kind of a support unit, so I'll go for the Fighters for Freedom. Depending on what my opponent does, there's a good chance I just take the initiative this turn. Okay, so it's a Partisan Insurgent. So there could be a follow-up one drop, but I don't know for sure. And under the circumstances, I'm just going to take the initiative rather than using Sabine's ability. My opponent does follow up with a one drop, which I don't like to see, but that's absolutely a thing that can happen. And I'm happy to have. Ooh, okay. So here I could Wing Leader, which would get me up to toughness 6, but it's not worth it because my opponent can attack with the Partisan Insurgent, which would put me on 1 life and then defeat me with Tarkin, or which would put me on 3 life and then defeat me with Tarkin Town. So I'm going to save the Wing Leader to buff Sabine instead, which is going to be a better target. I do, however, want to go for Wing Leader as a play this turn, probably. So believe it or not, we're actually going to resource Red 3, even though he's really good, because my play this turn is going to be Wing Leader plus Infiltrator skill. So Fighters for Freedom will lead off by hitting the enemy base. That's going to be a safer play relative to doing the Wing Leader plan, which gets countered by Tarkentown, or to doing Red 3, um, which is, I think, lower value. My opponent plays R2 and looks at the top card. I personally would not be running R2 in an aggro deck. R2 isn't aggro. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on with the R2D2 here. So I'm kind of slow rolling here. So I'm trying to get my opponent to show more of his hand. I don't want him to have a counter to Sabine before she deploys, so we're just going to use Sabine's ability, do some damage there. I would, of course, like to be able to play this Infiltrator skill while Fighters for Freedom is still on the board, so that it does a bonus point of damage from Fighters for Freedom's ability. But there's a good chance that that's not going to work out. My plan is to assemble Super Sabine Voltron, which is going to be Wing Leader, Infiltrator skill, and probably Metal Ceremony also all on Sabine. Um, if I get all those buffs on her, that's +4/+4, which would then make it so that Sabine can swing into the enemy base for 7 damage a hit, which would hopefully close out the game pretty quickly. Though of course, the opponent gets a say as well, and we'll have to see what happens with this. With the weenie units already on the board. So if he does a combined attack, he could do 5 damage, which would actually kill Sabine right here. Ooh, that's a nasty play. So the problem is that I can't deploy Sabine safely right now because the he can use Leia's ability to attack with both of those units and kill her. That is really not what I want to see. I would have liked it if there was a safer environment to deploy Sabine first. Um, I think I think I can't deploy. Yeah. I arguably should have had the Fighters for Freedom take out the Spec Force. Yeah, so what I have to do here is actually take the initiative. If I deploy Sabine, she just dies, so I have to take the initiative and try to clear things out. This is a really negative situation for me, and it's going to be very costly. In fact, I think I've lost from this, but we'll see if I can stabilize. In retrospect, I needed to have the Fighters for Freedom kill the Spec Force soldier, which would then put him in a situation where he wouldn't have this ability to just clear Sabine. Because right now I'm in a very negative position game wise. Ooh, and I'm not drawing removal either. Yeah, I think this one's done. I think I cannot, even though I have all these buffs that could put Sabine into a really strong position, I'm not going to be able to actually deploy her with Leia having these units watching over it. I think that's going to be game. Um, so what we'll do here is what I should have done actually there is passed and see if he hit my base or took the initiative. I basically took damage to my base for no reason there. If I had passed and he used his units, then I would get to deploy Sabine, and if he didn't use his units, then I would get at least something. So what I'm going to do is this is boring, but I'll just deploy the Spec Force Soldier. I'm just trying to like do stuff here and have my opponent hopefully do stuff that will create a safe spot for Sabine, but I think I'm not going to get one. I think the situation is unfortunately locked down. A wing really, really also a negative development for me. So what do I do here? So I could do wing leader, buff the Spec Force soldier. The problem is Leia can just kill him, so it doesn't really get very much value. We'll use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. That's just a stalling play. And I'm hoping that my opponent is going to slip up and give me an opportunity to get Sabine on the board, but I think I've already lost my moment. That last turn is like the turn where I either push a bunch of damage or kind of stall out, and it ended up being stalling out. So that was very negative. I do think I misplayed it a bit in terms of the actual stuff, in terms of the actual lines that I took on that turn. I should have recognized the threat to Sabine and taken out the Spec Force soldier. Um, Unfortunately, I didn't see it though, and that's how it goes sometimes. Sometimes you do mess things up. We're going to go for the wing leader play. This isn't good. This isn't good, but what it does do is allow me to at least be playing cards. and hoping my opponent makes an error here. That's really the best we can hope for because Sabine is so vulnerable. And this is really the strength of Leia's leader ability. If Leia's leader ability wasn't on the field here, Sabine could have just deployed last turn. One of the units attacks her, then I play wing leader, and she's out of range of the other unit. But because of Leia's ability, Sabine was in an unsafe spot, and I'm now unable to recover. We are going to deploy Sabine to at least make the opponent kill her. But of course, it's going to be relatively easy. But yeah, I think mismanaging that previous turn has likely cost me this game. Okay, so combined attack to immediately kill Sabine. Basically, what I was expecting, but does save me a little damage on my base. Might save my Spec Force soldier as well, depending on how my opponent plays this next part. I'll go ahead and take the initiative at this phase, and we're basically done. But we'll see whether my opponent somehow blunders it. Another partisan surgeon. One damage there, then Tarkin down for the kill, and we'll just type GG. It's over. The situation with me not seeing the threat to Sabine until it was too late last turn cost me the game. I was winning until Sabine didn't get a chance to deploy, and I didn't get a chance to use my cards that hand. My opponent says tough draw that game. And yeah, so I just got a little ahead of myself. I was confident I had a very strong position, didn't see the threat until it was too late, and ended up getting locked out of the game. We'll see if we can do some more of these. These aggro games are fast, so I'll potentially keep on going. Well, looks like that's my opponent's gonna try a different deck, so I'll record that as a separate video and maybe put it up later. For now, though, that was three games of Aggro Sabine against Aggro Leia, and ultimately Sabine was defeated 1 and 2, and I think that the that last turn was an example of the strength of Leia, or that last game was an example of the strength of Leia's leader's ability. Put me in a tough spot that I didn't even realize, and I think I mishandled it and was not able to recover. So. That was a bit of a lesson learned, quite frankly, but that's how we do that. Hopefully, the viewers can learn from my mistake and avoid those sorts of scenarios in the future. All right, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to you all for watching. I'll have my aggro Sabine deck list in the video description below. And yeah, I'm gonna keep recording more potential games with another matchup, and maybe that will be a later video. Thanks again, guys, and I will catch you later.